Franz. I'm CEO of CX Journey Inc. and a product advisor of cast.app. And I'll be hosting a 3-part series all about customer success, a really awesome deep dive into customer success. So the 3 parts for this series are, the first one is going to be around the current and future state of the CCO and his or her organization. The second one, we're going to talk about customer segmentation and customer health. And then in the last one, in the last part of this 3-part series, we are going to be talking about scaling customer success. And there is a lot of content in that one, so you'll definitely not want to miss that. So who are we? The we that I keep talking about? Let me just pass over the mic to the gentleman in this room and start with some introductions, and then we'll dive in. So Wayne, I'm going to start with you.
Well, thanks, Annette. G'day, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at a company called WalkMe, just recently went public, but a lot of you probably know and love it over the many years of trying to do in-app guidance and now really moving into data and understanding how features and in the products get used that you use every day at work, as well as websites. Before that, I was at Google, and I've worked at other companies like Salesforce as well. I've had 2 careers in my lifetime. First one was around education, adoption, and really that's where I grew up in software companies, starting in the 90s with a company called PeopleSoft. Well, aging myself now. And then at Salesforce, really made that pivot towards more customer success, support services, and really understanding the entire, what would be classified as a sort of chief customer officer type role. And so just excited to be here and with a couple of my really close friends and peers, and looking forward to discussing maybe some controversial topics. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Thanks, Wayne. Okay, Jeff, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jeff Heckler. I've been doing customer success, business intelligence, professional services stuff for 20 plus years, basically running customer-facing revenue teams, organizations like SAP, Accenture, Stanford. Currently, I'm the Director of Customer Success Solutions for MarketSource. We're a leading global provider of sales and customer success innovations and solutions, and here to mix it up with all my good friends and have some fun here today.
I like that very technical term that you do stuff. That is awesome. All right, with that, Dickie, I will pass it over to you, last but not least.
Thank you, Annette. Super excited to be here again. And I am Dickie Singh. I'm the CEO and founder of cast.app. And cast.app is like laser focused on scaling customer success, renewals, and revenue expansion using automation. So with cast.app, businesses can generate data-driven personalized content and recommendations, present them to their customer stakeholders using virtual CSMs to drive health, adoption, retention, renewals, revenue expansion, and advocacy. I've been a CEO twice before, and then I've been like an SVP of product or CTO at like 6 venture-backed companies, and I've worked with you, Annette, as well. Yeah, I have like 10 patents. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you all for your introductions.
Hang on,
Wayne?
did you say I have 10 patents? I just slips that in there.
I just slips that in there, yeah.
And when you were working at PeopleSoft, I was working for Bond, which was another company. We're in the same space. So aging myself as well.
Yet we still became friends. I don't know.
There you go.
And I will say that I did use cast.app when I was at Google as well. So I can definitely say this is a product you got to check out. Absolutely.
Awesome. Good. There is definitely some strong bonding and relationships here among us. So awesome. All right. So why don't we go ahead and dive into our first session, our first conversation, which is all about the Chief Customer Officer and the CCO organization. I'm going to kick it off with a question to you, Wayne. What is the Chief Customer Officer's primary role?
Oh, okay. So we just come out with a heavy-hitting question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally, that's one of those trick questions where you trap someone into giving you a definition that's not real. I mean, to be honest, what I've seen is the role of the Chief Customer Officer, while consistent in its understanding of making sure customers are realizing value, having great experiences, and being able to create advocates and things like that. What actually sits with the CCO is dependent on a number of factors, and that includes the size of the organization. It also includes things that you don't normally think about, which is the maturity and sophistication of the thinking of the executive team, their experiences and where they come from. If they've been around for a long time in more of the traditional, not sort of a digital native type company, but they might have a different set of experience. And so their lens of understanding and ability to actually be open to what a CCO covers actually would vary. So for example, you'll talk to some of my peers and they'll own pre-sales. And you're like, well, that makes no sense because there's a sales org and a pre-sales should be with the sales because that's what we've grown up with. But then when you look at a SaaS company and it's large enough in size, you'll see that the majority of the revenue comes from the existing customer base. You know, you could say something like 60, 70% of new revenue each year is coming from the existing customers. And then you throw on and 100% of renewal revenue comes from the existing customers. Now you're looking at 80+% of all revenue is dependent on how well the chief customer officer organization is maintaining those accounts. And so I've seen that. I've seen examples where product sits inside under the CCO, because if you think about what the CCO is doing, it's owning the responsibility of all this revenue and the success of that customer base. And the product is the primary driver in many cases of the ability for the customer to be successful. So I can tell you that the role itself, while it encompasses traditionally services, support, and customer success, I think more modern sort of thinking around the CCO is developing to looking at other parts of the business and saying, it's not about the CCO role, it's about what does the customer really need and the demands from your organization and what are the roles that probably most fit there.
And I think if you put it at a high level, CCO is really in charge of ultimately the customer experience, right? And the customer experience doesn't just happen post-sale. The customer experience happens or starts long before, I say it happens long before they even become a customer. And so a lot of those sort of functions need to have either a full report into the CCO or certainly a dotted, a matrix or something into the CCO. Jeff, what have you seen? I
really like where Wayne started this off. So our apologies to the audience. We've kind of just gone to class 303 off the bat. But so what Wayne's first statement was about what the company needs. And so my experience, having recently come from a newly minted unicorn, is that all the executive management changed over and then was introduced to CCO. And the CCO came from an experience that was deep in SaaS, which was low average revenue per account, but very high volume and high velocity sales. And so the executive team that was brought in post-acquisition did not have that experience, not come from a heavy SaaS background. They came from much more of the business stripes of the venture firm. And so the CCO really came in to help coach, guide, and augment all the other true customer facing roles. And that includes everything from top of funnel through trial to pay and acquisition. And so the CCO brought in a level of maturity for that particular business and other businesses that I've seen and I've advised on as well, that really drives the business at a highly functional area as well as organizationally. So I think from that point, and then from there, it can fracture all over the place. But starting in SaaS, and we'll get into customer success for non-SaaS as well, that the CCO can really bring in all that experience while these unicorns, decacorns, all the money that's flowing around tries to mature up and go up market in the market space as well.
Absolutely. Dickie, any thoughts on that? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can talk from like the CCOs that we are talking to from cast.app. And so we are seeing like, just like marketing over the years became more technical. We had like marketing ops, and we're seeing similar things happening. Like, marketing to customers requires like a different mindset, like a customer enablement. Obviously, everywhere you look, like they're talking about like the growth of customer operations. And a couple of new things like getting data scientists, data engineers, as well as like, I'm not talking about the administrators who manage a CS platform. We're seeing those people also be part of the CCO organization. And it's indicative of what happened like 10, 15 years ago, which is more automation, more technical ways of like using and reaching out to the customer. So that same thing as I see is happening in customer success.
Yeah. What other roles are you seeing, Jeff, in the chief customer officer's organization?
Well, it's all the classic ones. You can also throw in their professional services and everything that completes the customer lifecycle. Again, it comes down to the focus for what that organization needs. You'll have the contention over where does the customer start? right? So for a CCO, that might just be the it might be the support, the customer success functions, as well as then the implementation and post go live teams. But more and more, we're seeing the full range of that sales cycle. And I think that's important. I think that once you start to segment out the sales from the customer, especially in a heavy PLG model, then you start to have to fight over dollars and where that flow comes from. And that also comes through an organization like marketing. And I see a lot of chasms being built here where and we kind of discussed this in a couple of moments before we started recording, but the marketing function has always lived with the sales and pre-sales organizations. And as we develop more of our relationships and NRR from the customers after they've been initially signed, then that marketing function really needs to sit within the existing customer and user base. And there's a number of reasons we can dive into that. But the point I want to make is when you have the marketing function running all of the pre-sales and post-sales, then you know where the decision is going to be made and when that's going to fall. And it's going to go to net new and top of funnel activities. And then the rest of the weight will fall to, oh, well, customer success will handle that. So it would be very mindful, the sophistication of what a marketing org and quite possibly multiple marketing functions need to fit within a CCO, CMO, as well as underneath just the CEO's purview.
When you're a chief customer officer, what roles report into you, and what departments or what functions report into you? And then we'll come back to the marketing discussion too, because we want to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on that marketing stuff too, but no, for me, it's the traditional, kind of services, support, customer success, all the things Jeff's kind of mentioned as a sort of entry point. What we're talking about now, I'm newly there. I'm 100 days in on my journey. And as a company, they've never had a CCO. So this is a learning journey we're all going on together. But we're creating new functions, including customer experience and insights as a dedicated team. So focused on, voice of customer, surveying, customer advisory boards, all those things that you might think sit elsewhere, usually marketing. Like, no, they're things that need to be owned by the CCO organization, supported by marketing, obviously. But usually we ask marketing to take those things on as a way to sort of say, oh yeah, they're connected to customers. And as Jeff just said earlier, I'm like, there's a really, really subtle but important example I want to share, which is a company called Salesforce, a little tiny SaaS company you've probably heard out in the Bay Area. But if you think about what I was there when this was happening, right? So when you think of the switch of their marketing, what is it all about now? It's all driven by trailblazers, right? That's their marketing. Like the look and feel around trailhead, all that stuff is a subtle shift of saying, we actually realize we're the #1 market leader by a long way. And so we understand most of the value of this company comes from the customer base, not the new logos. So that switch of saying trailblazers and the hoodies and all the, that's all about the customer. You don't see them talking about, oh, come join Salesforce. You see they don't do that anymore. They use the power of their existing base and advocacy to drive the new logos, and their marketing is switched to focus on the customer. Most companies haven't worked that out yet. Most companies are still pouring most of their resources into top of funnel, lead gen, and things like that. And that's okay because they're smaller. They're not $20 billion in size, and I get that. But at some point, you've got to start moving slowly the focus from the top of the funnel to the existing customer base, where is all your money is going to come from? And you need to do it a lot sooner than I think companies realize.
Absolutely.
We're talking acquisition versus retention here, right? And where that focus is, especially for the chief customer officer organization. And that's going to take us into marketing for a second. But I want to here's our first controversial discussion here, right? Because I'm the one here representing customer experience. You guys are representing customer success. And I would say, I don't know why we should butt heads on this, because really we're all focused on the customer and stuff. But you made a comment about customer experience and insights and voice of the customer and surveys not sitting under the chief customer officer. But in my experience, coming from at a customer experience angle, the chief customer officer absolutely has those things, those functions, those responsibilities sitting under his or her purview. Because if we don't have those insights, if we don't have that data, how are we going to, design and deliver a great customer experience? And oh, by the way, if we design and deliver a great customer experience, it certainly makes things a lot easier for the sales team, for customer success, for support, for everybody else down the line. So it really is sort of, where does it start and what's the umbrella? So that's my first controversial thought there. I'm going to ask you guys to weigh in on that.
Well, I'll throw something out there that is totally irrational. Newspapers back in the day have an ombudsman, right? And that this individual didn't sit with any organization, but rather floated between the readership and the owners to say, this is what's working, this is what's not, this is where you're acting out of character and not within your ethics and principles, and here's where the readership should have a voice, etc. So what if we had those CAB and those VOC and those initiatives within an independent, which also owned deal desk and advocacy for both company and customer, and could sit outside of all functions and sit within the CEO's function, or even advocate to the board what the direction of the company was. And so that's one idea there. And I'll just drop that and see where it rolls.
I'll let Dickie and Wayne weigh in on that.
Well, while there's space here, so I'll save the airtime. Just the space. So the other thing that comes up with CABs and VOCs, and this is the same thing. If within the customer organization, they have those, and that gives them the ability to be those very vital feedback loops to product, to marketing, et cetera. So when I talk to CEOs and board members and look to the ways that they're going to allocate resources and which parts of their organization to CCO, I actually, they know I'm a CSer through and through. It's in my blood and obviously my passion. What I also tell them is, you want to keep things outside of the CCO if it becomes a question, because that will allow your organization to build much more cohesive cross-functional communication and reliancy and dependencies on each other for that. So be mindful of where you sit all of those other functions as you build them out.
Oh, now you're hitting a topic that is really near and dear to my heart here. Now we're going to talk a little bit about a customer-centric culture. I don't want to go down that path right now, but if we have that customer-centric culture in place, and that data and that information and those insights are flowing freely, and people are just thirsting for that data, that's ultimately what we need to have. So we'll talk about that more in another session. But Dickie and Wayne, I want you guys to weigh in on.
When we were talking about this, my mind was going back to the customer sat days, and we implemented CSAT, we implemented NPS, but I never had really fond associations with NPS, and I always thought there are so many issues with NPS, except for Apple, our customer, who was when their satisfaction dropped from 98.1 to 98.05, we would get calls and all that stuff. Everyone else was manipulating it, right? NPS. Oh, let's only ask these people these questions so that our scores are better, or let's see what we can do to bring them a notch above. So only look at the people who scored us a 7 and give them personal calls and take them up to the next level. So I think I remember Wayne and I kind of share the thoughts around NPS as well. And again, it was great to see Steve Jobs talk about CSAT, in all his presentations and all, but those are my kind of thoughts. But yeah, people manipulate them, but those are still needed for. I think Wayne reminded me one day was for driving advocacy, right? People who give you scores, really high scores, is what you want to use to drive advocacy. Wayne, your thoughts around that? So.
Yeah, look, I always get in trouble talking about NPS. I call it the lazy person's metric. So if you're relying on NPS, it's just being lazy. I want one, I want to lose some weight, I'm going to take a pill. That's literally what NPS is to me. So I just don't think people use it for whatever's convenient for them. They manipulate it to whatever they need it to be. And the reality is it's just one of 1,000 different things we should be getting from customers. The thing I don't like about it, it measures intent. And I always say this, I hate my bank. They're annoying. They always mess things up. And I give them 2 out of 10 on the NPS survey every time. Make sure I go in and give them a 2. I'm never going to leave. It's too hard. I don't have time. I don't want to deal with it. So I'm a loyal customer for life that gives them a 2, right? And the question itself is are you going to recommend this to a friend or colleague? why does a friend care? I'm like, what software problem? I'm like, the whole premise itself is silly to me. And at the end of the day, you know, it does identify advocates. If customers don't respond, that's a flag that says, hey, we just should dig a little deeper. And why don't they care? And it might not be they're upset with your product. It could be marketing's hitting them, CS is hitting them, support's hitting them, and they just got fatigued. Like, but you got to know. But going back to the original question, though, I just want to be really clear here. Like, I'm not sure if I'm a CS person or a CX person, or as a CCO, you're actually all those people, right? And so we've got this internal battle right now at WalkMe where I've come in and said, what do we call our organization? Right now it's called the CCO org, which I think it's pretty cool, but everyone's like, you know, we're not going to name it after you, Wayne. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But I'm like, what do we call ourselves? And we're doing like, we actually got feedback, and there's like, well, are we the customer success group, which is what Salesforce calls it? So CSMs are not customer success. They're customers for life, right? Because customer success is all these functions in Salesforce's mind. At Google, it's called customer experience. It's the cloud customer experience organization, which includes CS and CX and advocacy and all these things. And the reality is it is all those things. And so, but I think it's really important to what you said is, you know, NPS versus CES, right? Here's a really good example. NPS is, what's your intent? What are you thinking today? Because tomorrow it's going to change. Like, you have a bad experience tomorrow, you can go from an 8 to a 4 just because things didn't work. And then you have a great experience, goes back to a 9. It's all over the shop, right? But CES is, what was your effort to get something done? I can measure that. I can track that. And I can tell you, coming into WalkMe, I'm like, well, I have to log into 4 different systems to get the answers to one question. The documentation is separate to the university, which is different to the community, which is different to the marketplace. And they're all different logins, and I can't search across, right? What if we just put them all together, did a single sign-on and put a federated search, and I go to one place, get my answer, and move on? That's customer experience. It's not sexy. It's not cool. It's not bells and whistles. It's actually making it easier for my customer to get what they need and get out and move on with the rest of their day. That to me is way more important than if you're sitting in a cafe talking to a guy, are you going to recommend this product? I'm like, who cares? It doesn't matter. So I'm not saying CS is the best either. I'm just giving the example that there are other things that are important and measurable that we should focus on personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to both of your points, you know, the metrics that's the problem. People just look at the metric and they focus on moving the needle, and that's it, and not what happens behind it. That's why I like CES too, because it is exactly as you described it to be. So that's a whole webinar on its own, and we can talk about that for days and days. So and we probably have about 10 minutes left here. So let's switch back to marketing, customer marketing versus prospect marketing. Who owns that? Where should that sit? Why? Dickie, I'm gonna let you start on this one.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we noticed is within prospect marketing, we do not know enough about the customers, and we do a whole bunch of like A/B testing, and we say, oh, this thing works for this industry or this segment, let's try that. But the customer marketing, regardless of who owns it, is very different. We know too much about the customer, and what we have to do, it's a process of summarization and personalization, telling them what value that they have attained, telling them, doing uptelling or cross-telling, using the word recommendations. You make recommendations to the customer. So it's like very different. In prospect marketing, you may say like, hey, click on this link and your life would get changed or whatever, right? I'm making that up. But in customer marketing, you can say, this is how you improve your NDR by 1.2%, XYZ, right? Like, you can talk about like real hardcore data and make it like data driven, and the recommendations can be like personalized to the person that you're talking to, versus as like spraying, praying and spraying like to everyone. So that's what I feel is the main difference between prospect marketing and customer marketing.
Awesome. And since you brought up uptelling and cross-telling, I'm going to pass it to Wayne here in just a second. But if you really want to know what that means, check out Wayne's book. Seriously, that's where I was introduced to the term, and it's awesome. So Wayne, go ahead and talk real quickly about those two terms, and then I'll let you weigh in on the marketing topic too.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for showing the book. I'm not sure, is that a $5 product placement? I can't remember what
you can pay me later. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I've got the version.
Now I'm up to $20. Look.
All right, there we go.
Oh no.
Wait, okay.
Yeah, I got one too.
Perfect. Jeff, Come on.
Well, in all seriousness, I was introduced to the term uptelling from a lady. Her name was Zinnia, and she worked for a company I was advising. And she said, I really feel like customer success is great at uptelling value. And I'm like, oh, what's uptelling? And she's like, it's not upselling. We don't sell. We don't have quotas. And our goal is not to sell more license. Our goal is to extract more value for the customer. So uptelling is telling them how they can get more value. And that leads to opportunities sometimes from a selling perspective. But this comes back to the whole marketing question. Like, I believe marketing sits in the corporate marketing function. I don't think that the CCO should have his own marketing organization. She shouldn't have to set it all up and get it going, because it already exists. Marketing automation software and the graphic capabilities and targeting and social and listening and all those things are actually something we should leverage. The difference is, I do believe that the CCO, should own some sort of services marketing person, someone responsible who sits in the leadership team, who attends every conversation, is really understanding what the CCO function is trying to drive, and then translates that with the marketing team to say, how can we maximize these limited resources to help our customers extend value, create advocates, renew, whatever the key focuses are. And so for me, I feel like that's one of those, I don't think the CCO should have ownership. I do think it sits in the right place. What I do question is how much resource is being allocated for the customers versus the new business. And then is the CCO org actually being able to effectively communicate in marketing's language what it needs, translating those business requirements into a marketing need? And I think that having someone with a marketing skill set sitting at that leadership team level is actually a critical component.
Awesome. I love it. Jeff?
Totally agree. I like the hybrid. And what I've been thinking about recently is, as we go down this marketing path for customers and for their value, the account-based marketing and the intent marketing that I'm getting into and helping some others get into has been very interesting. And then from there, and Annette, this is really in your wheelhouse, but then there's the account-based experience. And so we're not just dropping it at the door where ABM leaves off, but we're really taking it through the whole life cycle in customers for life vision with the customer. And then to maybe circle back, and this might be able to patch some things together for us as we're discussing here, is that the founder of NPS, Fred Richheld, has recently come up with another metric called the earned earned new customers. I know. Or
NPS 3.0.
Right. And so that measures the revenue growth that comes from both the earned and the bought customer, actually versus those two, and then looks at more of that referential model and that CSQL, the customer success qualified leads, and really saying how much are we deriving from there in that base of customers. And that's really the uptelling and really the advocacy. And then from the first point that I tell individuals in CS, and when they're looking to allocate marketing dollars, is look at where your MRR in for your company is coming from. And if we are bringing in net dollars at 20% of our annual revenue versus 80% of our annual revenue from our customers that already exist, then I say, well, a nice baseline would be you spend your marketing dollars as such with that 20-80 split, or whatever your split happens to be. I see companies spending so much money at top of funnel and acquisition and trial to pay versus really nurturing the base that they have, and at a very large discrepancy in ratios. So those are some of the things that are on top of my mind.
So the LTV and CAC and even the problems associated with LTV and CAC, they have been around. They have been well thought through, and sales, pre-sales, they use that. They know how much it costs them to get a customer. But on the flip side, NRR is still so new, right? And we have 20 variations of NRR. You have NRR, you have NDR, you have a constant currency NRR, and so on and on, right? It's not that well established, even though people say, hey, it's a very simple formula, you can do it. But if you ever look any of the S1 documents or so, you would see 20 variations of that. But when you talk about LTV CAC, it's always the same, right? It's whether it's monthly or it is yearly, what's the lifetime of the customers, it's always the same. So well established. That's why we are able to kind of figure out the problems in that side. But again, just a thought.
Yeah, love it. Love it. All right. One quick question for you, Wayne, and then I'm going to come back to you, Jeff. Wayne, what does your ideal CCO organization look like?
One that has amazing NRR, high CSAT, great CES scores. You can throw NPS. I don't care. No, I think look, the CCO organization has a very important, I guess, goals that it has to achieve. And one of the things I was really impressed is I'm starting to see the industry understand what a CCO's capability is. When you look at HubSpot with Yamini and you see that the CCO becomes the CEO. I was talking to one of my friends in Australia and they're like, oh yeah, Medibank, one of the big, insurance providers for the whole nation, their CCO just became the CEO. Like you're starting to see, and that's not a SaaS company, that's an insurance company, right? But you're starting to see CCOs become more prominent inside and outside of software. That's amazing. We need more of that. It's more customer centricity. It's a recognition that we need to have an executive at the table. And I always say this, like we are the voice of the customer inside our company. We're also the voice of our company inside the customer. And people forget that it's a two-way thing. They always think, oh, we're voice of the customer. And I'm like, that's only half the equation. Like, actually, we're actually the voice of our company inside the customer because that's our job. We're there with them all the time. And so I'm seeing that maturity of thinking that when you think of a CCO, they're commercially savvy people responsible for balancing customer demands, market trends, future trends, while trying to deliver business success in real time. These are very influential people inside a company with a very large responsibility. And I feel like the more that we understand the capabilities, the more that we trust that this organization can have more of the resources of the company, I think the better the outcomes are going to be.
Yep. Jeff, my question for you, I'm going to shift gears for a second here. CCO, I don't want to say versus, but CCO and CRO. What's the difference? Do we need both? What should we be talking about in that conversation?
Glad I didn't get that one.
Yeah. I could spin on this for a while. You can read my latest thoughts on the past 2 weeks LinkedIn posts. It depends what the company's intention is and if it's true or not. CRO, when you look at a CRO, you know what you're getting. You're going after revenue. That's it and that's all. A CCO is way too often the lion. It looks like a lion, but really is internally a lamb. It's something to pacify the new business movement. It's a checkbox for a board and or CEO to say, yes, we're customer centric. It has no teeth. So you really need to strip it out from the organization, see what it owns, what's its budget, what's its resources, where does it sit, is it autonomous? I will come back and cherry pick off of the question you asked, Wayne, and we're all cutting up numbers and all the important things, so I won't traverse that territory over again. But what I will till up is things that are scalable from my experience from a customer-facing leadership position. Is that if you bring in a CCO or have a CCO in your organization, 12 months later, the rest of the organization says to themselves, how are we getting along before without this? That's one good key. The second is, I've seen this and been a part of this, is that if the eNPS, so your employee net promoter score, that needle changes significantly if you're running that metric. And if you're not, you can consider it, bring it up to HR. The eNPS is very telling at scale. So not a couple dozen employees, but at scale. And then thirdly, when the customer facing leader is asked to join meetings of which they weren't normally a part of, leadership meetings at the executive level, annual operating plan meetings, quarterly updates, half-year update presentations to the board, and asked to and provided more slides and airtime, then you know that organization and that CCO has in fact not only made change, but has the ability to impact more.
So Dickie, my question is CRO, my understanding is CRO is different from a head of sales, right? Head of sales focused on sales, but the CRO actually does have to bring in sort of that broader, looking at the customer journey, thinking about the customer and bringing that into their organization as well. So thoughts on that and thoughts on CCO versus CRO.
So, we see the CRO role, and we have also started seeing, just like in the customer, we're seeing CS ops. So you're seeing rev ops, you're seeing like all sorts of like roles. But the the CRO also owns part of the marketing, which is like so intertwined with bringing the customers in and making them customers. But I feel like the CCO, I've seen organizations that have the CCO and the CRO both, and I've seen that they're only CCO or only CRO, and it depends who is more visionary and who is more, and what's the relationship between the two, right? Like, and the very controversial question, who owns post sales? Or, I'm not talking about like add-ons and renewals, but I'm really talking about like upsells and cross sells. And I know that upsells and cross sells are vendor specific terms, but that's what we are like talking about, right? Who owns that? And I've seen kind of both environments. If the upsells are like really big, they may go into sales. If they're not big, they may be with CCO, with the CS organization within the CCO. But it's interesting to me, like between the CCO, and the COO and the CRO, there's a lot of like overlap, and there are a lot of, and every company is like different. So,
well, the key to getting past that is having goals that flow from the board all the way down to ICs that align. So then you can work out your comp issues through that. But then the shared vision and the 5 KPIs from the company that get split down to revenue teams and how they generate those out becomes important.
Yeah. And part of the reason is like when you're using products in, again, I'm going back to that prospect marketing, you have like 20, 30 variables that you use to personalize, like you say, hey, Jeff, and rest of the story. But when we are talking in CS, you have 100,000 variables, like, what was, how are things changing? How is the usage changing? How is the adoption changing? And you want to communicate that both to the executive as well as to the user of the product, right? So that's one difference that I find, like, way too many variables, bringing it down into a concise way, whereas like having few variables and like using that across the new customers. So.
All right, great. That was a great conversation. Thank you guys so much. Before we wrap up this session, anything else you guys want to add on this topic, the CCO and her organization? All good?
They're all good. Yeah.
Awesome. Good. That was a meaty one. So looking forward to seeing what we've got for the next 2 sessions in this series. So thank you everybody for joining us for this session. Please be sure to come back to see session number 2 and number 3. Number 2 is going to be all about customer segmentation and customer health. And then the final session, session 3, will be about scaling customer success. So we will see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Bye.